Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You know what I like to do on my show. I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want to get you fired up about safety. My guest today is Earl Randall, and we're talking about his book, Let Her Roll. Now, we're using this book to reduce the number of automobile crashes. I know that that's not something that people think about every day, but hey, guys, we need to be safe while we're out there on the road. We need to be mindful of others, and we need to know the things that we can do to make sure that we get from point A to point B as safely as we possibly can. And especially even though all of us may be home right now, we still want to make sure that we are safe when we travel. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about Earl. He is the author again of Let Her Roll and has been interested in cars, trucks, ATVs, and pretty well everything that rolls on wheels, he says. Well, along with teaching both junior and senior high, Earl always conducted a high school driver education class. Now, he has received not only his bachelor's but his master's in adult education as well from St. Francis Xavier University, a master's of art a master's of adult education degree involving producing units of study in driver education. Well, after accepting an early retirement from teaching, he opened his own driving school. Now, he has instructed over 2,000 students to drive and has conducted many more defensive driving courses. Now, Earl has attempted to provide valuable information on operating a motor vehicle safely in all kinds of driving conditions. It is his hope that readers will find these pages both interesting and informative, and that's why we have him on today. Now, you know what I'm about to say next, right? Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Earl. Thank you so much for being on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today.
Good day. It's great to be with you.
Now, I love the fact that you have chosen to go in the line of education and making sure that our students know what to do when it comes to driving. Did you always have a passion for being a teacher, or maybe I should say, at what age did you discover that you had a passion and that you wanted to be a teacher?
Yes, about after I finished high school, I thought that teaching would be a good profession for me, and teachers college, and then to university.
And I love the fact that you are doing driver's education. I don't think that people think about how important your job is. I know the students think about how important your job is because they want to take your class. I know that it was offered in my high school, and it is a beautiful way for the students to be able to learn in a non-stressful environment. But can you tell us a little bit more? What is it like to take a driver's ed class?
Well, it's very interesting for the student because most of them, as soon as they get to be 16, they want to get behind the wheel. So they have to take about 25 hours of classroom time where you're talking about driving skills. And in the course also they have to do 10 hours behind the wheel. So they get quite a bit of experience as well as the theory and classroom. So they're very interested to get going in that as soon as they become old enough.
Mm-hmm. Now, being an author, is that something that you've always wanted to do, or did you find that it was just the next step for you in your progress?
Well, I always, after I taught driver training for a number of years, maybe 4 or 5 years, I started to collect a lot of interesting pictures related to driving skills. And I kind of kept these on file, and then I kept writing some notes and things. And I found the students found these notes and even the pictures sometimes helpful in them learning better driving skills. So the whole thing kind of more or less came together over quite a long period of time.
Now, did you have a particular thing that motivated you to write this book, or was there a particular thing that inspired you to say, now is the perfect time to write this book?
Yes, I would say that would be true. That now is the time, because I was finding that students would, they'd go out driving in the car and they'd be in the classroom getting the theory part. And as everybody realizes, when you hear something, you don't remember it necessarily for a long period of time. So you get one skill and the different techniques connected with that, but then you can forget it. And I said, well, I think we should have something down in writing. So then I started to write the various skills down in writing, and then after a while this came together in a book.
Speaking of that, how long did it take for you to finish from the first word to having the published book in your hands? How long did that process take?
Well, because I had quite a bit of the material on hand, such as pictures and a lot of notes, I would say about 5 years actually putting it together. And it was during the last year. That would be just last year, because the book was published in last year in 2019. I would say about a year before it was published. That's when I really started to hit it fairly heavy and to write on it and to work on it maybe 7 or 8 hours every day.
What is one way that drivers in towns and cities across the country can make the way in which they drive safer? Is there anything that we need to do to be safer, more mindful drivers?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different things, but I find from teaching driver training for a lot of years that in towns and cities, the very most important thing is to remember to do your shoulder checks. And this is particularly at intersections when you're taking either a left turn or a right turn. There's been a lot of accidents that have happened because drivers would be taking a left turn and they'd watch where their car was going and they'd watch other cars, but they wouldn't often turn around far enough to the left to see if a pedestrian was coming across from the left side. And as you're starting to make your turn, you can see the pedestrian on the right side of the highway fairly well, or I should say the street, because you're driving in the town or city now. But if you don't make that left shoulder check, you just won't see that pedestrian coming. And I know if I actually came pretty close to seeing an accident happen in a small town where a person almost got hit because the driver didn't make that left shoulder check, even though the pedestrian did have the right of way.
Is there anything that we need to do differently if perhaps you live in a more rural area?
Yes, well, it's quite a different thing driving in a city or a town and driving in a rural area. And of course, driving in a rural area, your speeds are always a lot greater. And of course, there's not as many pedestrians to keep an eye on. But there's one thing that I think that people should keep in mind in driving in a rural area. And it might be something that you would be kind of question at first. But as you probably know, a lot of accidents happen in rural areas because the vehicle that you are meeting is coming across the center line toward your vehicle. I've actually had it happen to me on 3 occasions where a car came across the center line. Now, you could say, well, what should you do in a case like that when a car comes across the center line? Well, you could say slam on the brakes and slow up a little bit. Well, that's not too good because the other car is going to be coming at the same speed. So the thing you should really do is cut over to the right as far as you think you need to go to avoid that car.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might also ask the question, what if the car is still coming at you and you have to put your car off of the highway in order to avoid that head-on collision? Well, I find that a lot of my students at first, when I ask them this question, they say, oh, never put your car off the highway because that's too dangerous. But I say that you should put your car off of the highway if a car is coming toward you. We'll say you're going at 100 kilometers an hour, or that would be about between 60 and 65 miles per hour. That's a pretty great speed. And if those two vehicles crash together, it's going to be a very serious head-on collision. But as you, if the driver of your car, would put your car even down over a bank, that's a safer thing to do than to allow yourself to be involved in a head-on collision. So that's, I think, one of the most important things a driver should keep in mind when they're driving in the country, to try to avoid that head-on collision. And quite often you can avoid a head-on collision by cutting over to the right as far as you can. But in a lot of occasions, you might have to put your car into the woods or into a field or anywhere out of the way, because whatever you hit out there, you can be assured that that other object is not coming toward you at a high rate of speed.
Such a good note, because I know that many times we forget that driving changes when we are out and about in many of the vacation places that we may go, especially here in the States. We forget that we have a lot of heartland out there, and driving is a little bit different. Well, it is almost time for us to go to break, but before we do, Earl, if you could please, can you remind everyone what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay, the title of the book is Let Her Roll, and the book does have a subtitle, and that subtitle is called Tips and Stories to Improve Your Driving. You can get a copy of it at most of the major places that books can be purchased, such as Barnes and Noble, and Amazon, and eBay, and Walmart, and it can be purchased at
All right, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for a Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. You know what I like to do on the show. I want to enlighten you, inspire you, and empower you. And today we are doing just that. My guest today is Earl Randall, and we're talking about his book, Let Her Roll. We're talking about vehicular safety. I know, something that we don't always talk about, but something that we need to make sure that we do. It does not matter what city, state, or even country you are driving in. We need to be mindful of the laws and the rules of the road. Well, my next question for you, Earl, is this. We've talked about cities, towns, we've talked about being in the rural areas, and now we need to discuss the freeway or the highway, whatever you call it, where you live. What are some things that we need to be mindful of to make sure that we are driving as safely as possible when we're doing speeds that are over 50, 60 miles per hour?
Well, that's a really good question, because quite often, people will say always make a shoulder check if you're changing lanes. Now, let's suppose you're driving at, we'll say 60 kilometers, well, let's say 60 miles per hour. That would be almost 100 kilometers per hour. That's speeding right along. And some drivers will take quite a long right shoulder check if they're going to change from one lane to the next lane.
Mm-hmm.
And your car can really go out of control and go out of your lane while you're looking back. So one main thing I think you should think about when you make shoulder checks out on the highway is if you make them very quickly and don't take your eyes off of the path that your car is taking, because you don't want your car to go out of control. Now, sometimes we have new features on cars today, like if a car is coming up behind you and you're going to change into that lane, you can get a signal given to you that you shouldn't change lanes. And these new features in cars are very good, but an awful lot of cars still don't have those features in them.
And you are so right. I absolutely love the fact that it does kind of beep at you, does this little flashy thing on your mirror to let you know that it's that it is something coming there. A wonderful little trick for caution. Very mindful, I thought, of the designers to be able to do that. But like you said, there are still a lot of cars that don't have that. So thank you for the reminder. Check, but check a little quicker, perhaps, to make sure you stay in your lane. Good advice. Thank you for that tip. See, this is why we have awesome teachers in the world, everyone, to remind us of these things. Now, when it comes to the theme of your book, and I don't want for it to just be painted with a broad brush of its driving safety. So I want to touch on that just a little bit. Let her roll. What is the overall theme, but what are the topics that you discuss in your book?
Well, with keeping to a large extent on the proper way to do different driving techniques. For example, chapter 1 is called Starting, Stopping, and Passing. And you might think in just starting a car and stopping a car, it's not a very difficult thing. But, if you don't make the proper shoulder checks when you're starting, and if you don't signal, and also keep a good check out for any possibility of pedestrians walking in front of you as you're starting, you could have a crash. And then we have a chapter dealing with other road users. Other road users, of course, involve other vehicles. They, of course, involve pedestrians. But we also have to remember the other road users, and those are often the four-footed road users, such as cats, dogs, and deer, and wild animals and tame animals. So that's something to keep in mind and kind of to learn the nature of these animals. For example, if you saw a turtle along the side of the road, well, you probably wouldn't have to slow down too much because that turtle probably couldn't get in front of your vehicle. There's a big deer there standing just a short distance from the highway. You'd want to slow right down because that deer could just take one big leap right in front of your vehicle and you'd be in a crash. So it's good to learn about the nature of animals and also the nature of children near the highway. If there's some children near the highway, you sure need to slow down quite a bit because especially a younger child of under 4 years of age, they don't even think twice before they would run in front of a vehicle. So some of the other topics included in the book are winter driving. And this is very important for a lot of people who live in a place where we do have winter driving conditions. And we have a chapter called The Danger Zone and Weight Transfer. This is a chapter that tells you some things you can do to make your driving safer on turns. And if you're trying to avoid, let's say, potholes, you can transfer the weight from one part of the vehicle to another, and that can make your driving a little bit safer. For example, if your front tire is going to hit a pothole on the driver's side, if you would cut your wheel to the left, and if there's no danger of other vehicles anywhere, the weight of the car would go over to the right side of the vehicle, and therefore there wouldn't be much chance of your driver's side wheel dropping down into that pothole. So that's a little bit difficult for new drivers, and I recommend that new drivers don't use this transfer of weight too much because it's a little tricky until you get onto it. But there's quite a few other things that can be where drivers can improve their driving ability. And like pedestrians is a very important thing that drivers really have to watch, because pedestrians can be very very unpredictable, and sometimes when there's crashes involving pedestrians, it's quite often the driver's fault, not necessarily the pedestrian.
Now, there's a section near the end of the book that's called Taking and Passing the Driver's Test. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. This section is put in there so that a young person, in most cases it would be a young person, although it could be an adult who didn't learn to drive when they were young, but any person who is wanting to pass their driver's test, it doesn't matter what part of a country a person lives in or what country, pretty well everywhere in the world, there are certain things that the driver needs to know in order to be able to pass that test. And I've put in all of the various things in this section that that a person should really read through in order to make themselves more comfortable with taking the driver's test.
Now, when it's time for someone to take the test, do you suggest that they would do many times like they do with any other test, and they would cram, read that book, go over the little manual that you can get from your local DMV? Should we read that and make sure that we do that refresher course? Or should we, like Vinny suggests with other tests, and that is make sure we get a good night's sleep, have a proper breakfast, and go in there with a clear mind and ready to take that test?
Yes, the latter choice that you gave us is really the better of the two. You can pick up some last second tips before you take the test, but generally you should be well qualified for the test before the day. In fact, 2 or 3 days before the test rolls around, you should be pretty well equipped for it. Now, you can do some last minute, driving. When I have a driver going for a driver's test, I will generally pick them up at least a half an hour before their driver's test, and we will drive around the town or the city for pretty well that half hour just to get them comfortable with driving for that day. But they're probably not going to learn a lot of new driving techniques on that particular day. It's just kind of to get them warmed up for driving with the examiner when they're taking the test.
I love that bit of advice. I know for so many people, they any type of test taking, they become just so nervous, and the anxiety is high. So that's a good pointer to know. Now, I usually
I was just going to mention, I think the reason why they become nervous for the test is they're often maybe not prepared well enough. And I find if a student really can become well prepared and know quite well how to drive, they're not likely going to be so nervous. And that is, of course, true with almost any test that you might be taking.
Now, for so many people, one of the things that they suggest is that you have a support team, that you have those people that can help cheer you on when you have a particular task that you're trying to do. And learning to drive is a particular task for some people. When it's time for you to go to your local DMV to do your driving test or take your written exam, do you suggest that someone go with them to help keep their nerves down, or is this something that people should kind of do alone as not to make them so nervous?
Well, yes, up until the time of the test, it would be good if one of their parents, drove them to the place. Well, they'd have to
Mhm.
drive them anyway to get them there. But of course, once the test is going to start, they have to go by themselves with the examiner. But it is good to have some support from a parent or a friend.
Mhm.
And of course, often the driver instructor turns out to be that person, because the instructor may be the person who is picking them up at their house to go for the test. But it is good to have some support and to give the new driver some extra confidence in their driving ability.
Mhm. Now, for the person who perhaps doesn't pass the first time. I know many times here in the States, you may have up to 3 times to try to pass the written exam before you have to take a breather and start all over again. For the person who perhaps didn't pass on that first go around, do you have a bit of advice or instruction for them on something they can do to make sure that it's a little easier, that they're able to retain the information or figure out what to do for the next test?
Yes, that's a great question. A good thing for the instructor to do in a case like this is to find out the reasons why the person did fail the test. Like
Mhm.
if they weren't good on their left turns at intersections, or if they weren't good for backing into a parking space or something like that, then you could spend an hour or two of extra time getting the student better at those particular driving skills. And another thing that the second test could improve over the first one would be that on the second test, they probably wouldn't be quite so nervous because they know what to expect.
Yes.
So it is a good idea to get a little more driving and to try to learn a few more skills before the second test comes up. And this will probably give the driver more confidence. And as a result, the driver would probably be less nervous on that second test.
Mhm. Mhm. Great advice there. I love that. Put a little bit of time between the first and second. Don't try to get right back out there. Practice a
Yes,
little bit more
you
so
do
that
have to
you
wait
can
generally about
conquer.
7. You generally have to wait about 7 days before you
Mhm.
can go for the second test anyway. So that gives you a little breathing room in between there.
Mhm. Mhm. Gotcha. Well, it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, Earl, could you please remind everyone what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you?
Yes, the title of the book is Let Her Roll, and some of the places you could get the book is Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Walmart, and pretty well any place that sells books.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, listeners. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
What a crazy year it has been. Anyone out there feeling just a little bit lost right now? Well, no problem. Join me in learning how we can turn fear into confidence that creates cash. I'm a part of a series that helps everyone pivot during these times of uncertainty. Simply visit helpmepivot.com and access this free mastermind that includes not only myself, but international experts sharing their secrets on how to turn this time into a time of opportunity. Simply visit helpmepivot.com.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer? Get us to open up, even push us further? It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
And we are back. Thank you so much for spending time with me today here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am Dr. Angela Chester, but my guest today is Earl Randall, and we are talking about his book, Let Her Roll. Now, I love that because we're talking about driver safety. I know it's not something that we think about necessarily, but something that we need to think about. We need to be safe while we're out there on the road, and we need to be the most mindful drivers that we can be. So thanks for picking up some tips that not only would your student enjoy, but a couple of reminders for us more seasoned drivers as well. Now, Earl, something that I usually ask at the beginning of the show, but I thought I would ask at the end. I love the title of your book, and that is this, the title. Did you find that it came to you first and you wrote the book around it, or were you writing and the title kind of came out of your writings? How did you come up with Let Her Roll?
Okay, here's where the title came from. I started driving with students and doing driver training in high school not too many years after I started teaching. So I think in about the 6th or 7th year after I started teaching, I started teaching a high school driver training course. And every day, pretty well after school, the driver would get into the driver's seat and get the seatbelt on, and we'd be all set to go. And it would seem kind of foolish for me to say, all right, set this car in motion now. So I would say after everything was all ready, just let her roll. And then I think I must have said that about 5,000 times during the next 10 or 15 years. And then when it came time to think of a title for the book, I said, well, what would be wrong with just let her roll?
Let her roll. I love it. Plus, it for me, it would kind of put me at ease a little bit that it wasn't so, not to be so rigid or afraid, or, that it wasn't so serious. It's kind of like, let's relax. And you ready? Let her roll. Let's go. Let's do this. So I like that. I think that's really appropriate, and especially for our young people. Well, I noticed that you did something else which folks may find to be very helpful, and that is you included large color photos in the book. Why did you think that that was important to include? What was your motivation behind that?
Yes, well, it's, sometimes they say that one picture will tell 1,000 words. And for most of the driving skills that I was writing about, I did have a picture, or in a lot of cases I had a dozen pictures, describing the proper way to do that. So the student can be reading through a particular chapter, and then as they're doing the reading, probably right on that page or possibly on the next page is a picture describing that particular skill. So it does help quite a little bit to have a picture, I think, to look at. It doesn't only help the student or the person reading the book understand it better, but it makes it more interesting for them as well.
That's true. Nothing like a little visual break to be able to kind of relax for a moment and take that in. Very, very smart. Now, for someone who says, I am a student, but I'm a little older, I'm not that 15, 16-year-old, I'm a 23-year-old, or I'm a 33-year-old student. Is this book written for just our teen group of students, or is it appropriate for anyone who needs to either take a refresher or is just starting in their driving career?
Oh, it's definitely for anyone. It's meant to quite a large extent for young drivers just starting to take driver training. But now there is a picture of one gentleman in the book who is 102 years of age, and he had to take a driver's test, so he called me, and I picked him up and gave him about 4 driving lessons, and he was a very good driver. So he took his test and he passed it great, and so the limit is definitely at least not under 102 years of age.
I love it. I love it. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because for so many people, I think they're afraid or they become nervous when they see a senior driver. But as long as that person is still able to do things correctly and properly, then there's no more reason for us to fear a senior driver as it is a beginner driver, as long as everyone follows the rules of the road. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that is for sure, yes. And
Mm-hmm.
another group of people that I think would be very interested in the book would be driver training instructors. In fact, there are some driving instructors already who use the book as a textbook. It is meant as a textbook, and I did have a review done of the book. The company that did the book they read it through, and I was lucky enough to get a 5 out of a 5 for a mark on it. And I think driving instructors would be quite interested in it, because at the end of the book there is a number of questions. In fact, there's about between 10 and 15 questions at the end of every chapter. So a driver instructor who would be using this book would possibly have copies for each student in the class, and they could be working on a chapter, and then the instructor would maybe get them to do the questions at the end. And the instructor might even want to tape those pages in the back where the answers for the questions are given, because they may not want the student to go to the back and just copy the answers into their scribbler. But I think instructors would find the book quite helpful for their driver training courses. And I guess that's one of the reasons maybe why I wrote the book, because being an instructor myself, I found I wanted to have a material that they could read and pictures they could look at, and then questions where they could be tested to see if they were learning the material in the book. So that is another group besides younger people and then older people who might be interested in the book, driver training instructors.
Would you suggest that for a younger student, since there are those questions in the book, would it be okay for mom and dad to quiz their child, to quiz the student on the questions, on the test questions?
Oh, that would be great. And actually, even if some of the questions the parents didn't know the answers for, they could check back in the back, and all the questions are given there. There is a section near the back of the book. It's about 10 pages in length, and there's a short answer for each of the questions given there. So parents could do that as well as a driver training instructor.
I love it. Now, we only have just a few minutes left before I have to say goodbye to you, but I want to just kind of open up the floor to you and allow you to, if you would please, if you could give us just some wit and wisdom when it comes to driving safety, some do's and don'ts, some things that we should remember, some things we should forget. Maybe maybe we learned something incorrectly. Just any bit of wisdom that you would like to share. I give you the floor now.
Yes, well, one thing for sure about driving on the highway is to keep alert. You can't let your mind wander. You can't let your eyes wander to some animals that might be on one side of the road or something like that. Of course, everybody knows very well that there should be no drinking and driving done, or drugs and driving done, because this is always very dangerous situation. And the authorities in, I think, pretty well all countries now are really hitting down hard on drivers who go driving if they have been drinking at all. So alertness and and not drinking are very important. Another thing is that if you have the knowledge of the rules of the road and how to drive safely, it will make your driving a lot safer. Sometimes they say that the cause of automobile accidents is mostly inattention. Now, inattention is the cause of an awful lot of crashes, but I often say that the real cause of the highway crashes is often the fact of there being a lack of knowledge on the part of the driver. If the driver doesn't know a particular fact, it could cause a crash. For example, if a driver drives through a puddle in the country in the summertime, maybe at a beach on a back road, and then they head toward the highway. Let's say this puddle they are driving through is quite deep, halfway up on the tires of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Then they drive along for a couple of kilometers, and then they're coming onto a superhighway, a freeway. Mm-hmm. Now, as they come along, they see a truck coming toward them down the highway, so they hit their brake pedal. Now, when they hit their brake pedal, they have no brakes because the brakes got wet in the deeper water. Mm-hmm. And all drivers should know that if they drive through deep water, they should pump their brakes for 5, 6, 7, 8 times in order to dry out these tires so that they can stop well. The stepping on the brake pedal drives out the brakes so that they can stop properly. So that's quite an important feature about the idea that if you know the facts and if you have the knowledge of the safety of the highway, you can avoid most crashes. But of course, inattention is a very serious problem. And as I said before, drinking and driving, that's a bad one. So, but I think the most important thing is gain the knowledge and then remember it when you are driving. And that should help to keep you a lot safer on the highway.
I love it. What a great pieces of advice. Thank you so much, because I'm pretty sure there's someone right now who's thinking about saying, is that what happened? I did go through some water. I didn't think about that, or I forgot about that. So thank you so much for that little bit of a refresher, and for us to be careful. We have so many holidays that are coming up, and we do need to be mindful of that under the influence, be it that it's alcohol or any type of pharmaceutical or drug, that we need to be very mindful of that. You know, Earl, Randall, I have been enlightened, inspired, and empowered today, and I'm sure that our listening audience has as well. What a great reminder that you have given us today, that we do need to stay alert and stay mindful of those around us. If you could please, before I let you go though, remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you? How do we follow up with you one last time?
Yes, okay. The title of the book is Let Her Roll, and the subtitle of the book is Tips and Stories to Improve Your Driving. You can get a copy of the book at Barnes & Noble or Amazon or eBay, Walmart, and any place where they sell books. And the way you can get in contact with me is my email is Earl Randall at randalldrivingschool.com. And I also have a website, and the website is randalldrivingschool.com. And my phone number happens to be 902-386-2077. And thank you very much, Dr. Angela, and I enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope everybody who listened enjoyed it, and hopefully maybe got a few safe driving tips.
I am sure they did. Thank you so much again for spending time with us here today. And listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in and spending time with us as well. As always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. And remember to not only be a safe driver, but remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Until next time, everyone, have a great day. Bye-bye.